Hey, welcome everybody to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is your host, Craig Domann. Today I have a gentleman as our guest who is from Idaho. He's a professor. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's a coach. He's an executive coach. Rob, you pretty much do about anything. His name is Rob Leone. And Rob, I want to welcome you to Pro Mindset today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me today.
Hey, we're going to get off on the right foot.
Yeah.
Your last name looks like lion, but it's spelled Leone. So I hope I got that close.
You did. You nailed it. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to dive right in. You've done some research. There's a lot of people that are mindset people, that are leadership people, and some of them have their information based in science and some don't. I'm one of those people that I don't have my information based in science because I've got 30 years of experience working with athletes, and I just see what I see, hear what I hear, and start comparing, and I get that research in real time. But you've done research, and you've done research on the relevance and predictability of the athlete identity to the workforce. Would you mind sharing with our audience what that's about and what you just
Sure. So let's back this up to where this became an idea for me. Okay. So I work with organizations. So as you mentioned, I'm a professor. My area that I focus on is essentially the psychology of work. So I deal with things such as motivation, decision-making, leadership development, all these different things. And then our business, my wife and I own a company called Black River Performance Management, where we essentially get to do the same types of things. And so one flows in one way and the other flows the other way. So as a practitioner working with business owners, leaders, things like that, I remember over the years hearing this tendency towards hiring athletes or hiring former athletes. And I grew up playing hockey in Canada, came to the US, played soccer at the collegiate level, ran track at the collegiate level. And so I'm well aware of both aspects, right? Both sides of the coin, the pros and the cons of so many different people. So I always thought it was peculiar that people would really double down on this preferential treatment thing towards athletes, but they wouldn't give it towards someone else or someone with a different background. So I continue to think about this over time and start talking to more and more people. And we've done a number of different studies that's pulled together some pieces that help give us some framework around this. But as I was walking into this, I was thinking, I remember playing soccer at the college level, and I wouldn't hire all those people on my team. It's a real self-serving, convenient belief in some instances. So what we did was we started to jump in the literature and the research. And actually, believe it or not, there's not a lot of research out there that actually ties athletics, athletic background, athletic identity to actual workplace performance. We see a lot of early stage research between such things as academics in athletes and well-being in athletes, things like that. But we haven't seen many people look at what happens once we get to the workplace. Actually, one of the things that has been researched is actually the opposite of what some might expect. So people make this assumption that because athletes, and this is a big bucket, right? Super general. They're good with time management. They're gritty, right? They're motivated, all these different things. And so what they believed is that, well, that would make a better employee than someone, at least we have some sort of criteria to base this off of, they think, right? But one of the pieces of research I used as I prepared this, and this wasn't my research, this is drawing upon someone else's research. If you take high performing athletes, right? And you know some of these people, I'm sure, that are coming out of the pros or Olympic levels, and they're actually having a tough time in the workplace because they've been given a diet and their nutrition and their training, all that stuff's been curated for them, right? Really handed over to them. So when they come into a workplace in some instances and they're left to kind of fend for themselves, to run a team or manage their sales pipeline or something, some of them are having a hard time. And kind of just like what I alluded to when I started this, it's not an all or none phenomenon, right? You've had great guests that are nailing it in life after sports, right? And they're doing a great job at that. So we started to dive into this further. And what we were able to tease out was that it's not as simple as saying, look, if you identify as an athlete, therefore you're going to be a better employee. But there is some evidence here that if you identify as an athlete, if you have higher levels of self-control and higher levels of understanding, it's called locus of control, where you think about it, how do I attribute success? Is it success because of me, or failure for that matter because of my work, or the external forces beyond us, right? So what we found is actually, if someone has a high level of athletic identity, that we've recorded their amount of volume of training, physicality to align with this. If they possess those two things and they have high levels of self-control, self-awareness, they actually do demonstrate a higher level of promise towards being intrinsically motivated and more likely to use what we call discretionary effort, make decisions on how they're going to spend their time towards the endeavor at hand. So basically, stepping way back out, there's not something magical necessarily about the athlete versus the non-athlete, right? And you think about this, a lot of the strength of even the athletes and the mindset are cultivated over the course of their development through a variety of different inputs, right? Teachers, not even on the pitch, right? Or maybe they had some training in the arts or music, and that helped them to learn how to work through some things, right? So all these things stack in and factor in together to influence who we are today, right? How we see the world, that mindset piece. So the findings are interesting in that we can't just stop and say, if athlete, therefore good hire, right? We have to dig deeper. And what that speaks is to an implication on the organization side to determine what are those deeper level attributes we're looking at. And like I said, those are things like locus of control or self-awareness, self-control. Now, do you have to be an athlete to cultivate those things? No, but sports makes a great venue to learn a bunch of those pieces. But we also know that some people have the mindset in their sports experience that the other person's the problem. You know, they didn't catch the pass. They weren't where they needed to be, right? It was everyone else's problem was the problem here. So there's a lot to unpack here and operationalize, but there's no doubt that our time in developing as athletes from children to where we are today, even as recreational athletes, right? There's so many formative, valuable experiences here that you might not go on to the pros or you might not go into college, but boy, you're building some great life lessons and building blocks to whatever it is you want to go do. You're going to kill it. You're going to do a great job at it.
Rob, I want to respond to that because I agree that you can't, generally speaking, say that just because a person was an athlete, they're going to be a better employee. Okay. But I do think there's some distinctive advantages for people that compete in athletics because of a couple of reasons. One is that let's just take a high school classroom. Or even in your university where you're the professor, very seldom do you administer a test and say, hey guys, give it everything you got. Be dialed in, be focused. Don't concern yourself with the fact that the person at the desk, in the desk next to you, finishes the test 10 minutes before you. Okay. And then with 2 minutes to go, like in football, you go, hey man, we got 2 minutes. Pick it up. Make sure you finish strong. No, what you do is most professors administer the test. When the test is completed, they get it turned in. They put it in their briefcase and they walk out the door. And there's not a lot of feedback. There's not a lot of coaching. It's all self-driven by the student, which is wonderful. And then the other thing I would say is that very few times, probably in your career, have you ever had an audience for your class setting where people were cheering on your students while they were taking the test? Okay. Or perhaps distracting them while they're taking the test. And so I just think there's some circumstances that athletes face that you don't face unless you're in sports, because it's very difficult. And you're going to face it in the workforce. Let's go through a couple of them. Unfairness, maybe preferential treatment to someone else. Maybe you don't feel seen. Maybe you don't see yourself the same way your boss sees you. In sports, those things are in spades. Every day, you don't feel like the coach sees you like you see you. You feel like he likes the other person, the person you're competing for the spot. You feel like the coach favors him over you. Those are emotional challenges that some people don't face until they get in the workforce. But when you're in sports, you face that from the jump.
Yeah. I love those examples because it brings me back to the different stages of my own experiences as an athlete. And boy, some people do this at a very intuitive level, right? And the skills there and they perform. Others need a little bit of mental framework and mental framing to help them understand the relevance or the fit, or even some of the little bit more nuanced aspects behind skill development. So you're right. Like what you learn there is this mindset framework. And I've observed it in one of the studies we worked with. We worked with ultra marathon runners. So these guys and ladies were running up to 100 miles in a period. And so what you're talking about there, they've experienced these adversities, these challenges, these self-limiting beliefs, not quite the same level of competition like for the spot like you're talking about, but they have their own stack of different issues in addition to, 18 hours of pain running up 20,000 square feet vertical elevation change, right? That's not square feet elevation change. And the interesting thing is that what we observed in this study was that they were really motivated in terms of their output, both in the mountain and at work. The mountain experience brought them a lot more joy, but you'd assume high level of joy from the experience, high level of output and dedication. But what we actually noticed in the workplace is many of them were not very satisfied in the workplace, yet they were still focused and driven. There was something about the mental framing, comes back to what you're talking about there, that, if we leverage what we've been taught and learned through our athletic experience, it can be a powerful framing device for us to go out and tackle things, work through adversity, overcome those self-limiting beliefs, get what you want out of this experience. So what you're talking about there makes tons of sense to me, but partially also because I was an athlete and I still use that today to help me understand some of the things I need to go through and how I need to mentally manage these experiences. Just as you're probably very similar. You're like, man, this sucks. Like, I don't feel like it today. I've done it before and I've done it way harder before. And you know what? I'm going to be more disappointed if I don't get it done today. So I'm going to dig deep and get it done.
Well, I definitely don't want to denigrate or look down upon anybody that's never played sports, because there's some outstanding human beings that are high performers, that are C-suite professionals and lots of different companies that have never played sports. It just wasn't something that they were passionate about. But one thing that I can tell you is that you can learn more in a game potentially than you can in 6 months in the real world at a job, because you talk about emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
You get thrown curveballs right and left. Official calls a red card on you in soccer. You get to go sit the bench, and that wasn't what you were planning on doing for the day. You have to deal with that. In basketball, you could get a quick 3 fouls really quick, and the coach put you on the bench for a while. And you've got family and friends, and the essence of the game is very important. And it could be win or go home kind of game, and you're the star, and yet you're on the bench. That's an emotional challenge. So I think one of the things that sports does, it gives you more reps. Gives you more reps at dealing with adversity, more reps at dealing with your own self-limiting beliefs. You take any obstacle you have in the workplace. I don't know which one there might be, but there probably is a few that you don't ever see in sports. But my guess is that you're going to see it in sports. And having two boys that have gone a long time playing sports, now into their upper 20s, it is difficult. They got to reconnect to their purpose. They got to make sure they're connected to their passion. They have to, as an athlete gets older, let's go 12 years old to 22 to 32. 32-year-old can come up with all the reasons why he or she should not play. It's time to move on and get into the real world. 12, you don't know any different. Okay. You're just enjoying your friends and the competition and being outdoors or whatever the case may be. But somewhere in between, you start transitioning from being fully present in the sport for the pure joy of the sport to there's other things I could be doing that might be more rewarding, that might help my bank account better, that might allow me to have stability in a relationship, might allow me to have the space to actually buy a home, where when you're chasing that sport, you don't necessarily have all that security.
I do want to, I want to go back to something you mentioned about the person that gets the red card. Now he's on the bench or she's on the bench, right? Or someone's pulled off the court because the fouls. There's real-time implications that we don't feel in the workplace in many environments. But on the pitch, on the court, it's real. And you have all these men or ladies around you depending on you. And you might be bringing them up, you might be letting them down. And so this is a beautiful aspect of sports. Also lots of pressure because of it, right? That we don't see often in organizations. Someone can poorly perform for days, weeks, months, right? Skeletons in the closet, sweeping it under the rug. And we don't find out about it until they leave 12 months later. And then we have to undo and fix all that, right? And so there's a piece of integrity that's missing there that, boy, at some point when you're on a team and you're in it together, you got to accept your piece in this, good or bad, and own up to it because everyone else is depending on you. And that's one of the things I think is a huge lesson, that if you weren't in that environment, it's hard to learn that over time. However, like you said, not everyone's gone through that sports path. But there are other things that we've experienced or people have experienced that in their formative years, such as theater, acting, stuff like that. I've never done that, so I can't really appreciate what it means to be connected with those other people, but they sure can, right? Just as they can't understand what it feels like to be on this team the way we're talking about it, they have a different level of appreciation and camaraderie and respect for each other that is building them in a way to be better players in the work world than some other people. So to your point, though, I really like that the immediate feedback loop that occurs game time.
I have a daughter that's spent her life in dance and theater and acting and that type of thing. She would always battle at the dinner table for relevance and credibility because, we're a sports family. And, she would say, hey, we're a team too. And hey, we're competing too. And there's a lot of similarities between the two, even though to the naked eye, they don't look like they're anything alike, but they really are alike. And their ability, one of the most amazing things I discovered through my daughter was early on, I would go to her theater shows and I would, they would have them over 2 or 3 weekends and they'd have a rehearsal, then they'd have the first show and then they'd have the next night. I went to one show because I thought they were all the same. And my wife would go to every one of them. And one time when my daughter finally became a senior in high school, my wife was like, why don't you go to another one? I'm like, yeah, why don't I? It wasn't the same show. It was a different experience. She did the same role. It was in Greece and she was Sandra D. But it was like a different show. And it was amazing because it's like the expression, the interaction with their people on stage was all different. And so I think that I'm not sure it's really the athlete identity that we're talking about. It's really the performer identity, because there's a lot of different ways to, if you're in the math club or you're in one of those brainiac clubs in high school, you're competing against other schools. You're going to have real-time pressure. You're going to have emotional challenges. You're going to face adversity. You might have it, let's say it's a quiz type competition. You're going to know the answer, but can't spit it out in the time frame allowed. Or you've got it at the tip of your tongue, but you concede to a partner or a teammate, a schoolmate, and they give the wrong answer and you had the right answer and you got to deal with that. So it's like, I think it's about performance more than it is about being an athlete.
I agree. I agree. And it's the mindset and the alignment with the identity, how we see ourselves, that, athlete just might be the language that that person knows. Whereas your daughter, it's the performer, right? And on that topic, both the math club and your daughter, other people are counting on them, right? And that's where the lesson is. And not to mention, and my youngest, has done theater for many years, and similar to your daughter, I'm sure, they put the time in. Also, like you're talking about just a couple weekends of performances, let alone the lead up of every night leading up to that for the week and a half before. And my son actually he lost his voice. He was the lead. Like, they're going through their own stressors pieces too. So right to your point, I appreciate that. Yeah, I agree with that. It's that mindset that relates to who I am and what I'm responsible for and to.
Okay, Rob, let's talk about this concept that I see happening over and over again, and especially in college and professional sports. It's the best coaches sometimes were the worst players. The best coaches were the guys that were at the end of the bench. And it's very seldom that you get did Michael Jordan become a coach? No. Is LeBron James going to become a coach? Who knows? Is Tom Brady going to become a coach? Probably not. It's like very, very seldom is the guy that's like the superstar to become the superstar coach. Deion Sanders is here in Colorado, and he's kind of making a name for himself in college football. And he was obviously elite when he played. But why is it? What is your rationale or opinion or observation about why do the guys that sit on the bench a lot of times become the best teachers and coaches in that sport down the road?
Good question. It's funny. We were just talking about this yesterday. My wife and I related to this. I think part of it is when you're naturally gifted and it's just coming to you, that skill, you don't have to think about it that much. You have to show up and do your drills to build capacity and increase that accuracy. But for others, there's an element of knowledge that informs the skill and the practice and the execution. And that's why we run through drills over and over again, right? Some people will just take to it really well and really understand it, and others need a little bit more refinement. And I think the people that are becoming the coaches are seeing how good coaches and bad coaches, not exclusively to one, are connecting with people and bringing the best out of people. The story I was talking about yesterday with my wife, we were talking about something similar to this. One of my college coaches said, and we were talking about coach mindset and how that influences the performance and the connection of the players. I had a coach that said, this is not a democracy. This is a benign dictatorship. And there's something to that. That's if you stop and think about it, and then you unpack that against what was happening on that team didn't make it very far because it was very much a coach knows best framework, as opposed to one of my best coaching experiences as an athlete when I was playing. My best coach didn't know he knew very little about soccer, but he knew how to bring the guys together to complement each other, to build each other up, to eventually hold each other accountable. It just wasn't the coach coming down on that. And so there was a lot of ownership and camaraderie there that at the end of the day, look, we went out and we played hard and we had fun. It's hard to work under a coach that is a very domineering framework that they're essentially making the decision for you. You're not thinking through the process. And then how do you have fun in that matter, right? And so that's what I believe is why we see these people that have been on the bench that are making excellent coaches, is because they're hearing stories from their teammates. They're watching how some people are being treated, how some people aren't being treated. They're putting these things together, and they probably have a better sense of what motivates or moves players as it relates to their sense of self, their identity, their mindset. And so they can really maneuver that very well.
Listening to you, I'm brainstorming at the same time on why I believe that may be the case. And of course, I don't know anything any more than you do, but just from a perspective, culture is defined by and established by the coaches. And if it is a dictatorship, it's going to be very difficult for players to feel seen and heard and appreciated and all those things. And when you create a meritocracy and you make it based upon merit, not favoritism or not just what the coach wants, then you give freedom to the players to express themselves in whatever fashion they want to express themselves and be whoever they want to be. And that, to me, creates a better performer, a better athlete, a better player. And then I think when you create that culture, you really have possibly three major areas that you want to think about. One is the individual skill development for each player. The second one is the connection between the coach and the team and the players. You know, what kind of relationship do they have? Is there a trust there? Are they having fun? Do they feel like they're being treated fairly? If we interviewed, let's say it's soccer, let's say you got, 15 guys on a team, and you took a survey for who should be the goalie, who should be the starters, who should be the forwards. 90% of them say the same thing that the coach is doing. That tells me the coach has got a good culture because the players can see the same thing he can see. I think the disconnection is when the players don't see what the coaches see. And then the last thing is not just the connection between the coach and the players. I've never seen a soccer manager, soccer coach go out on the field and play defender. I mean, those guys don't get to play. So they're on the sidelines and you've got, the players on the field. How do they interact? How do they trust each other, connect with each other, love each other, sacrifice things for each other? Somebody may be taking an overlapping run and running their booty off, and teammate wants to reward him for his effort. So he sends him a nice pass. But if you don't have a good culture, that player may just hold on to the ball.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
So I think the coach sets the tone for everything. I mean, the coaches don't realize everything they do is watched and interpreted by their players.
Yeah. For right or wrong, good or bad, right? I didn't mean to say that. Well, that's how it came across. All right. And that's what's tough, right? Young coaches, we think about high school and even younger than that, parents stepping in to try to do the best job they can. Their intentions are there, but they might not have methodology. You start moving higher in the ranks into college. Hopefully it's a little bit more refined and precise. And then you get to the pros and it's pretty dialed in, right? Because of a lot of mentorship. But yeah, you're right. Like it's an important piece of it. I agree.
What has been just to give us a little flavor about you, what has been your biggest challenge as a professional that then I'm asking you to go back a little bit in time, but, from what you thought it was going to be like when you were competing in sports and you had that alpha male competitive edge, work hard, sacrifice, dedicate, all those things. Then you go into teaching, you go into instructing, you obviously have a business of coaching. What caught you by surprise? What were you ill-prepared for?
I think one of the things, and this goes back to what's the nature and quality of the teamwork on that team, right? And is it a we team or is it a me team, I team? And I like to think and I hope that we're much better at it today than we were when I was playing, much more across the board. I remember, just to your point about fighting for that spot and working for that spot, that it was me against everyone else. And to some extent, that was my own mindset, but some extent, that was what some of the coaching and the players nurtured and cultivated was you're either in with us or you're not with us. And there wasn't this level of appreciation for each other as a part of the solution. Look, we win as a team, we lose as a team. And so that was a piece to really transition into was, this is not stuff I can do by myself in the workplace moving forward. Like, of course I could roll up my sleeves and do everything by myself and hustle. And what's the expense for that or the consequence? Maybe my health, maybe my well-being. But what really the consequence to that is if I just alpha, drive this initiative with a team, I'm not bringing them in as part of the solution. I'm not bringing them in to play their part to contribute to the overall well-being of the team And now, like what I'm talking about is in the workplace, right? So it's easy. So we think about this in terms of, say, micromanagement. You could see a line from that really intense, driven, direct personality going into the workplace from sports, where it was a grind, it was highly competitive. And now I'm in the workplace, and you know what? I can do it the best, and I might as well just get my hands all over it and manage it to ensure that it's of the quality I want. Well, that's not how the organizations work, right? And what we do know is that if you did do that with your team, your staff, they're going to pull back. Their levels of motivation will diminish. Just as if we did that to an athlete in the program. If we were too overbearing, we would suck it out of them, right? At some point, we have to stop top talking and pushing them, because we might break them and then they withdraw, right? Same thing's true in the organization. So how do we learn that? We go from being the experts on the field and being really good and popular to having to share, learning how to share in this organization the successes of the organization and to position people to do well. This is where actually my athletic experience transitioned me actually really well, is that I left the sports aspect and went into the leadership and management aspect with this lens that I was still on a team. It was still a sports team, and, air quotes for no one that can see it right now, right? So my mindset was that this organization's my team, and now I'm the coach. I'm not the sweeper anymore. I'm the coach now. How do I kind of conduct this and orchestrate this just as I would as a coach on the soccer team to be successful in the workplace? And I use that lens quite often to think, well, I can't just run all the runs by myself and do all the works myself. I need all my players on my team to be performing at a certain level. So instead of me being a doer in the sports world, going into the leadership realm, I had to stop being so much of a doer and a driver. And I had to be more of a coach, and I had to bring the best out of my men and women that were working with me so that they felt like they were contributing, so that they were being successful, so that we were moving forward as a team, and they were feeling fueled and energized at the end of the day, not beaten up and worn down, because I couldn't leave that real, like you're talking about, that alpha direct drive perspective.
The word that comes to my mind that is a powerful word is empowerment. As a team leader, as a coach, if you can empower your people and not push them, not force them, but empower them. And there's probably a million different ways to describe what empowerment means. But in this context, I would say that it means allowing everybody to use their gifts and talents and develop their skills where they're weak and contribute, so that everybody is contributing. So you have it, instead of a workforce, it's really a contributing force. We're all contributors. And everybody feels like they own it. So when you empower people, think about any sports team you've ever been on. When a majority of the players felt like they owned the team, they conducted themselves differently and better on the field as well as off the pitch, because it was they felt ownership in the team. And if you think about being a CEO or a head of a department in the workforce, same game. People feel empowered. They feel like they own it. They feel like they're important. They feel like what they do matters. So I think one of the things that, we've all done this in some way, shape, or form. When you've had a weak link, you've created a situation where what they do and how they do it doesn't matter. Coaches can do that on the pitch by, hey, we're going to stay on the right side of the field and we're going to take our weak guy out of the game. Because every time the ball touches his feet, we lose it. So we're just going to move away from him. But then you get in a game where they take away your strength, and the only place you can go is the other side. That's when you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, so when I think about empowerment, I think of it in terms of creating the conditions or cultivating the opportunity for people to be successful, right? To really rise to that level. And as you mentioned, the coach carries a burden of that, and burden/opportunity, but how they do it can do great things, or it could destroy a team, right? You look at pro teams that the coach is just not jiving with the organization for whatever reason, they're fired. Someone else steps in and people come together different and they perform at a level they didn't perform at. Same thing with, your star on your team's out injured. And then all of a sudden the players that weren't getting pucks in the net are getting pucks in the net now. And they're playing in a different manner with a different energy. And it's a complicated balance of the two. And what I love is when I have athletes in the workplace that are struggling with the leadership concepts, that I can draw upon exactly what we're talking about here. It's a language that we share to help illustrate what we're trying to do in the workplace, right? Remember back when you were in college and you were doing this, and this, I could repackage those things, because once again, we don't all come to, whether it's work or field, being stars, right? Some of us really have to work hard. And I know all the pros are working hard, but like, there's definitely the difference between, those people that aren't making it on the field. They're sitting on the bench a lot more. They're just potentially not as naturally where they'd like to be as some others. Same thing's true in the workplace. But if we can bring some perspective, and this is where I think youth sports has a lot of opportunity, both in terms of coaching preparation, but also how do we help young adults develop that mindset to understand that they're in charge of their reality, and that when they're having problems learning, say, a skill, they seek feedback to develop it according to how they understand, right? So too often when we're coaching, we're just pushing people through drills, especially at that young level, without really, it's not helpful when it's just wrong and we're yelling at them and telling them it's wrong, do it over. At some point, we need to get in there and model it and bring them through it. And I remember this growing up with some of the best hockey coaches I had. They could barely walk on land. They threw on their skates just because they're old. They're just, their body's beaten up, and they're getting in there and showing how to grind and dig that corner so that the players truly understood what it is they were doing. Same thing is true in the workplace. We need to do that at times for people to help them understand, what does this look like? What is that standard we're aiming for? And then good things can happen.
Well, pro mindset is about rewriting your story, which is really controlling your thoughts. And it's about having systems, and everybody's got them, but it's your standards and how you apply those systems that matter. And I think that the more information you can give an athlete as a coach, when you're on the coach side, the more information, the whys, how it's going to show up, how it's going to help them get better, how it's going to make the team better, all those type of things. Even if you don't have the puck on your stick, or if you don't have the ball in your hand, or all those types of things, just by you moving without the ball can help the team. And so I think instead of just telling them what to do, you got to tell them why you're asking them to do what to do.
Yep. Exactly.
And you got to show them how. So almost everything we do is what, how, and why, or you put it in any order, but what's usually first. Where I think a lot of young coaches, maybe dads too, they focus on the what. This is what you're supposed to do. And as soon as they understand why, they just do it naturally.
Yeah. I agree.
Right?
I think that was probably, as I think about my own self, because I've thought about this over the years, that was the piece that was missing the most for me, was not just the what. It was the why behind it. So because I'm kind of thinky, right? Very cognitive oriented. And I needed those pieces, and I didn't get those pieces. And I just kind of wonder what I would be able to do differently if I would have had those pieces. So I think about those. I think about my son that was on a soccer team that the coach didn't provide that. And those players that had the potential to really advance and be strong didn't get there because their skill only took them so far. They had great fitness, but they needed a little bit more understanding of, what does it mean move to space, and why do we move to space, so that we can move the ball up the field, create opportunity, and draw people away from other people. Those are not things that we necessarily understand, right? They're not necessarily innate. But if you don't have a coach that does that, that's a real disservice for them.
Okay, you said you were a little thinky. I was sometimes an overthinker as well. And when did you realize you were an overthinker, and how did you respond to protect yourself from being an overthinker? Because if you look at professional sports, in any sport, you got the guys, a few, not a lot, that God blessed with so much natural ability that it doesn't matter what they're thinking about. They could be thinking about where they're going to have dinner after the game, and they're still going to be good. But there's just not very many of those. And then you have the guys that are really good when they're playing out of their heart and they're playing in a field game. And when they start getting in their head, their skill and their performance starts to diminish or decrease. And then you got the people that don't think enough. Now, they're not the Superman. And boy, if they just added a thinking component to their game to add to their skills, they would really be effective. But how does this all fit together for you? Like even in your journey or in your son's journey, in terms of how do you balance the thinking component when you might have a little bit too less or a little bit too much?
That's a tough one. That's really personalized, right? Because we unpack that each differently. This might not be where you wanted this to go, but one of the things I had to do is I had to reframe my approach to my sport, my commitment to my sport in terms of, especially during the off season, it wasn't so much an execution because I could only get what I can get. And I was underserved in some instances, and then other instances I underserved myself. But to me, what was helpful was I started to approach this as a job, that my mindset went from I was a player and athlete to this is my job. This is what I'm getting paid for. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't being successful in this space. And for me, that helped me refocus my thinking as it related to training, as it related to opportunities, as it related to interactions with the team. And that was huge for me. More on the cognitive level, how did I manage the overthinking piece? At that age, it was tough, because that's all I knew. And unfortunately, I didn't have people. See, this is where I think, once again, this is where your pro coaches and trainers and psychologists have it all dialed in these days, right? Whereas as people are coming up through the ranks, I think about my nephews who are young. I just hope that their coaches have a little bit of wherewithal as it relates to this aspect, so that it's just not, the grind and the top performers, and then you're out and there's someone that has great speed, great hands, great capacity, but they've never been able to really find them because they didn't have the right type of cultivation from the coach or leaders or trainers on the team. So, I'm sorry, I didn't get right to it because this was after the fact that I really picked up a lot of this. I think back to that.
Oh, I think we get a lot of wisdom after we're finished.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
when you grow the most is when you reflect back and you see it through your kids you coach, kids you have that are going through the same thing at the same time. You're like, man, when I was in that situation, holy smokes, man, I probably didn't do enough of this and maybe did a little bit too much of that. Here's one thing that I have created this concept called performance bubble, where if you can create an invincible performance bubble, it is a safe headspace that you can operate out of, that everything that serves you gets to be in the bubble and everything that doesn't. And you have to self-regulate because you're always going to have thoughts that are going to corrupt it. But if you're intentional about, okay, it's game time, it's practice time, it's tryout time, I don't care what it is. It's like, it's time to lock in, like distractions and noise and what happened the last time. And the fact that the officials might not be fair, and you might have your girlfriend in the stands this game and it's the first game she's ever seen, doesn't get to come in.
Yeah.
What does get to come in, your preparation, your practice, your confidence and belief, your confidence in what you do and your belief in who you are, that gets to come in. And it allows you, theoretically, to be in the flow. And everybody knows it's hard to be in the flow. But it's one way to take a big step towards being in the flow, because you're getting out of your head and you're not attached to the outcomes and the results. You're not staring at the scoreboard and responding to the scoreboard every time. And you're actually able to do what you trained yourself to do.
Yeah, I agree. And, I don't know what you grew up with, but I didn't have much of that growing up, right? And to me, that would have made, I think, a world of difference. And part of that, let's relate that to the workplace nowadays. What you're talking about here is a level of psychological safety, right? This permission to participate, to contribute without fear of retaliation or retribution. And think about the cliques and the power dynamics in the sports teams we grew up in, right? There was a lot of groups and subgroups, and some of them are doing great things. Some of them are doing really terrible things. Right. And you're stuck in the middle of this trying to figure out, where do I exist? And I remember what was really tough for me was like, I wanted to be a dedicated participant of this team that's committed, but I don't necessarily agree with some of the junk that's going on around me. And I didn't want to be sucked into that, pulled into that. And especially when, some coaches prioritize the connection between the cliques as, selection criteria, or you're part of this team versus not a part of this team. That was really tough for me because I needed something different. I need some more people that were a little bit more like-minded. And I'm sure there was a bunch of us that were on that team. Now that I think about it in retrospect, there surely was, but there was nobody pulling us together to kind of facilitate that camaraderie, that collegiality, whether that's a coach, a trainer, or, veteran team members that can say, hey, look, I was there. Let's do this. Let's support you. Let's move you through this. Like, to that point, one of the things I love, and I don't know if all sports are doing this, but I think back to hockey, certain teams require, the rookies that were just drafted to live together and to live with an upper class family member, like upper class or veteran player and their family as a part of that social interaction integration piece. Like, that's huge. And that wasn't possible at the levels we were at, but that to me is organizations doing it well to prepare those kids that have this talent to really be successful and not to get derailed over the years.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind when you're sharing that concept is the idea that in professional sports, they have a draft and they bring in new people, and those new people are threatening people's jobs that are friends with, let's call it the leadership players, the veteran players. And I experienced this in high school because I had success early in high school in football and basketball. And I was bullied by the seniors because their friend was on the bench because I was on the field or on the court. And so it's really about, like, let's take this into corporate America, into the business setting. When the manager walks out of the room, when the CEO is out doing whatever he's doing, playing golf, or she's doing whatever she's doing, how do the teammates legislate themselves? Because it isn't always like they draw it up on the board. It isn't, there's buddy systems, there's connections, there's, neighbors, people, hey, they belong to the same country club, they go to the same church, their kids are best friends. And so you as an employee or as a business person can get overlooked, even though your work product is the best. You don't have the best connection to somebody.
Yeah. And I appreciate that perspective, because I think in the sports environment, it should be a priority of the coaching staff, right? What does that look like? How do people show up when I'm not here or we're not here as the leadership staff? Same thing's true in organizations. How do our team members show up when I'm on vacation for 2 weeks? And what are those dynamics? And a bunch of this relates to psychological safety. And it's important because, unfortunately, it's these things that derail us as organizations. When the leader says, I don't care about this the interpersonal relationship aspects of the team, you guys just go out there and perform, and they do that in sports also, we're leaving out a big part of what makes us human. And that's a variable of that emotionality of us, right? Like, we have this need to feel like we're a part of something. We have this need to feel like we fit in and a part of this team, both in the sports realm and in the work realm. But if the leadership's like, look, I don't believe in putting time into the culture aspect of this team or my organization, people just work hard and show up and get it done as I did, and that's good enough. That isn't good enough. That's not where we're at anymore. I don't think, as in this conversation last week, we're no longer in this place where the leaders can just, and I'm talking about work leaders, but the same is true for sports, in my opinion. You can't just yell at people and tell them to figure it out and tough up and grind through. And this is what I had to do, so now you get to do this. There's a level of care and compassion that needs to go into this now, because that's what the workplace is demanding. And if we take that and we look at that, that's what's going to make our athletes even better too, is integrating that component into the team dynamics, just as us integrating this component into the work dynamic. If I do this with my teams in my organization, my people go home feeling more fueled at the end of the day. They feel like coming back. Their levels of commitment increase and they have fun doing it. Same thing's true in sports, right? Like if you don't like the people that you're playing with that are on your team, how do you really prioritize their success over your own? And so, once again, as I mentioned, this is where I believe our pro sports have really figured it out with the integration of psychologists and the mentoring that goes on and all this stuff. We're really doing well at that. It's the areas below that actually are bigger concerns for me, because I think we're leaving too many people to become burnt out and bewildered and disenfranchised as it relates to their prospects to maybe just go on to college to get a scholarship to change their trajectory of their life, maybe even go on to the pros. But we're making it less fun, whether that's parents and coaches, for those youngsters as we go through this, because we're prioritizing the wrong things. We've figured this out in the workplace. We've figured this out in the pros, right? Why is this not trickling down to the development levels of parents and coaches in those systems?
My brain went negative, Rob. It just went to a negative place on where parents go wrong and where coaches go wrong at the youth level. And I'm gonna talk about the coaches first. I think one of the biggest places coaches go wrong is when they're ill prepared for a situation, conflict resolution, how to make it a meritocracy, how to explain to the team that, hey, we're only going to have one starting pitcher. We're only going to have, one point guard in basketball, whatever the sport is, one at a time. And I love you all, but I've got to make a decision to decide who's going to start when the game starts. And when they don't know how to communicate in those gaps, which nobody teaches them how to operate in those gaps, they default back to how they were coached.
Absolutely.
Okay. And it doesn't make any sense to anybody. It never made sense to them when they were a player. And it certainly doesn't make sense today to players.
Yeah, they hated it when they were a player, right? They hated that coaching but they're doing it now.
Now they're doing it now. They're repeating, they're carrying the torch of a negative, like, coach speak, and honestly could go a couple generations, because when they repeat it, there's a possibility their kids, 25 years from now are going to be doing the same thing. And then with respect to parents, I think being a parent of a couple athletes and coaching my own kids and coaching other people's kids, everybody loves their kids, and you know what? They're supposed to. Everybody wants to protect their kids. Everyone wants to support them. And everybody has a tinted lens about their own kids, because it's just how we're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really tough when, let's say, for example, you're coaching a team and I'm on your team and I go home and complain to my mom and dad about how Coach Rob's not being fair. And he's not giving me the same opportunity. And every time I scored today, he didn't see it. But every time I missed it, I looked over and he was just kind of like shaking his head. And the guy I'm competing with, every time he missed it, he wasn't watching. And when he made it, yes, he saw. I don't know how that can happen, but that happens, right? And the parents say things that they shouldn't say. Like, hey, it's, they unintentionally denigrate, shake down the coach, and they discredit the coach in their kids' eyes when they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And so over a period of a season, I think what happens is everybody has optimism at the beginning of the season. But if you got 20 kids and only, 5 are playing in basketball or whatever sport it might be, as the season moves on, the parents of the bench warmers have unintentionally created a royal gorge between their son or their daughter and the coach. And we don't want to do that as parents. We want them to stay in the game, stay in the fight, because let's say it's 9-year-olds. We don't know who's going to grow 6 inches next summer. We don't know who's going to end up being 6'4" and running a 4.4 and all those things. So you want them to stay in the fight. You don't want to disenfranchise them from their coach.
Yeah, it's such an important message, right? So how are we role modeling, whether that's as the veteran team members or parents to our children? How are we role modeling how to respond to things that we see that we don't like, right? And that's something that we focus really hard on in my house is it's not just reacting, because if I react, my boys see me react, and that becomes modeling for them of what's acceptable. And to your point, when that parent starts siding with that child, it's one thing to be concerned for your child. Let's just say, look, they're not getting the playtime, and this was agreement that we had that everyone's going to get young enough down that they need to get, relatively consistent playtime, stuff like that. It's one thing for them to go and have that conversation privately with the coach, right? And to work through that, and they work it out. That kid does not need to be a part of the mindset and the thinking and the processing of that parent. And we don't help our kids now when we're throwing that coach under the bus to them, because it's teaching us that it's fine to dissent. You're talking there, you're saying, like, if you came home and said that Rob always missed the goals and you were complaining to your parent about me, gosh, I don't remember ever being critical about a coach in terms of, like, that was not my place to say anything, right? But I also think that things have changed. Children have a seat at the parents' table, dinner table now, right? And all of that. And we see how that's affecting sports at that young level now, and it's changing. And I'm worried about it. I'm worried about their mindset. And I'm seeing them come into the workplace, and I know how that's changing their mindset in the workplace because of how people have processed the stuff out. And it's tough stuff, but you're exactly right. Like, these are important things that we have to be mindful of, especially if we want to keep integrity, right? What are we ultimately trying to teach young adults now about sports? What's the value of that, right? What's that conversation like right now? Is it to be a better human, or is it to get a contract? Is it to go on to college? Like, the message could be all sorts of things, but I think too many parents and too many venues are talking about this as if their kids are going to be the great one. And they're not preparing them for the gray area in life and not preparing them for a letdown. And that what goes along with that is not talking to them in a way that they can pull their own bootstraps back up and dig a little deeper and go a little harder, right? But that's tough. Like, my parents could never kind of reframed that for me because that was a skill I don't think they had. And I'm assuming that's pretty consistent with a lot of parents. But it's stuff that our kids and our young adults and our high school athletes really need in order to be even more successful, both on the field and off the field.
Okay, that question of integrity and what you communicate as a parent to an athlete child, I think might be one of the most important questions you have to figure out. Because it does have a ripple effect in everything they do. And you can teach them to become quitters because it's just not the sport for you. It's not the coach for you. It's not the team for you. But at some point in time, you're going to run out of sports that you can try. And then when you jump into sports too late, you're going to be behind. And so you're going to be left out. And then when you get in the workforce, if you have that kind of mindset of blaming others, it's a problem because the common denominator in every one of those failures might be you, right? And so one of the lessons that I learned from one of my clients 20 some years ago that I passed on to my kids, and I pass it on to my clients now. And when I coach people, I implore them, and it's this concept: you're a human being, not a human doer. And you've got to believe in yourself as a person because God created you perfectly imperfect for a purpose. And you got to find that out and live in that and embody that. It's not the judgment that you do to yourself or you feel like the world does to you for how you do what you do. And so it's really just a bifurcation of what you do from who you are. I don't care if you're a soccer player, hockey player, basketball player, theater person. You have an entity that's separate from what you do. It's who you are. And it's very difficult for me. When I'm playing board games and I'm playing golf and I'm doing things today, how I play, whether I win or not, does influence how I feel about myself. And it shouldn't. I go out and play horrible golf, it doesn't mean I'm any lesser of a man. And so if you can, share that with 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 16-year-olds that they're important, they're valuable, they're meaningful. There was, 2 million sperm that could have got the, and you were the one. It's like, embrace that. And you can be great without being a great performer, where society and social media and culture teaches us that you've got to be a great performer before you are considered to be great. I wonder how many athletes, let's staying in the sports space, are just great people, but we don't know their names because they weren't the headliners.
Exactly.
Great adults, great spouses, great parents, great people, but they were never the star. Ultimately, that's kind of what you want for your kids. You want them to be great people.
Yeah. This concept of identity is tricky, right? So do we see the concept of identity is both powerful to help us, but it can also pull us back, right? So if my identity is too caught up in winning, and that's part of how I see, that's part of my mental framework, it's easy to be disappointed, especially when you're not winning a lot, right? And so your message is really important, relevant there, that it's this human development aspect, that there's life outside of sport, there's life outside of theater, there's life outside of work, right? And so, mind you, if you're on a pro line, right, that is your job. That's what you eat, drink, breathe, right? But that's not what our young adults are, right? They're still trying to figure out all these pieces, and hopefully they become good humans in the process instead of getting sucked into some of the kind of the nasty byproducts that we sometimes see with athletics and things. And then once again, getting back into parental role modeling or the lack thereof for them, right? So that's really super important stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we need better humans in general, regardless of the industry and practice, right? We need compassionate people that are community minded, that will help lift other people up. And we need that on our athletic teams, because when we all rise, we shine, right? And then we also need that in our communities and our workspaces.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Rob, I want to thank you today for being on Pro Mindset. I just looked at our clock and we have gone quite a bit, and I appreciate your time today. Where can people find you if somebody is listening and they want to check you out?
Sure. Probably two easy spots. Number one, our website. Our company is Black River Performance Management. And so the website, because it's such a mouthful, it's Black River, the letter P for performance, the letter M.com. So blackriverpm.com. You'll learn about our company. We work with actually all of such organizations. We've trained athletes in certain areas of mindset. And even we used to have a cycling studio, and we'd bring athletes in the off season and train them through that stuff. So we have a variety of different services. We do not focus on athletes. We're actually organization or industry agnostic, context specific. So the stuff that we're talking about, if we're talking about performance, team dynamics, we can do that in most environments. And then the other place to check me out would be LinkedIn, and just Rob. And then last name is Leon, but it's spelled like lion, as you mentioned, Lion. So Rob, then Lion on LinkedIn in the search box, and that should bring me up, and you can learn more about me there. You can connect with me there. You can get on my calendar for free there if you want to chit chat about stuff we've talked about here, or how do we bring some of these practices to our organization or our teams. Happy to chat with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have
Thank
an
you.
awesome day.
It's Craig Domann, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And more importantly, I hope you gained a pro mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast. And I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.